Hello, everyone. We are here with Writers in Health, and we're super excited today because we're just grilling Scarlett St. Clair, basically, on self-publishing. So it's going to be a fun time, and I see we already had a couple of questions that came in the chat, and actually a lot of questions that came in ahead of time. So we're going to be getting to those too. But before we get started, why don't we do just some quick updates? So we'll start with Scarlett. What updates do you have?
My book, Touch of Malice, is now on Amazon hardcover, so it's available for pre-order. And that was really cool. And I guess a reader works for Ingram Spark, and she said she was working on the batch today, and the first batch had 5,000 copies in it, so that was really cool. And I was like, what is happening? And so that was really neat. And I've also started working on King of Battle and Blood. And then Saturday, I have my first competition, my first bodybuilding competition. And I'm really ready to have that behind me. I really want to eat pizza.
Wow. Bodybuilding. I'm just picturing like Xena Warrior Princess. That's the only.
I would love to look like her. That would be really great. The only thing I notice right now is how thin my face has gotten. Like, I just feel like I look so different.
I don't know. Well, of course, all body types are beautiful and we love it.
Yeah.
But Xena is just very fierce. I would love to be fierce like that. But awesome. Jenny, what about you? What kind of updates do you have?
Let's see. I did my British panel last week. I did not slip into a British accent, so that was very exciting. I felt very good about that. It was my biggest fear. So I am 15 weeks now, I think, from the release date for Dark and Shallow Lies. So all that like publicity stuff is kind of like really kicking in, and I've got several big like marketing things coming up, and we're talking about like pre-order campaigns and all that kind of fun stuff. So it's very exciting. Lots of cool stuff going on. Of course, I'm desperately also trying to write book 2. So it's been a little bit of a struggle to like focus on that when all of this other stuff is so much more fun. So that's kind of where I am right now.
Exciting. Yeah, it's very exciting. So your debut book, baby, it's going to be really fun. Someone just posted a really cute picture on Twitter today of a student like holding up Skeleton Tree, which seems so old because it was my first book. I'm like, oh yeah, she loved it. I'm like, amazing. It's fun how these books still stick around for so many years later. People are just discovering them. Wasn't that long ago. It was like 4 years ago, but
it really wasn't that long ago. You're acting like you're
like a long time
dinosaur.
ago. It is. That's a long time in traditional publishing, though. Your 4-year-old book is ancient history. So. But yeah, I've been really productive working on a lot of stuff. I have a couple new middle grade, like spooky proposals. My adult is with a couple betas, so I'm excited to like do something with that. And I'm working on a nonfiction idea that I have for a middle grader now too, and like brainstorming. So lots of stuff happening. But let's dive into our questions because we have so many. And since we had one that came in the chat just now, we'll kind of head over in that direction. But we had a lot of questions that came in ahead of time that were kind of about how you get started with self-publishing. So you completed the manuscript, like what you can do with the manuscript, and like what your next steps are from there. So I'm assuming editing is part of that. And so we had a couple questions about finding a dependable editor. And I know you kind of have a different take on editors because a lot of self-published authors don't use developmental editors, but that's something that you've done before. So do you want to talk about that whole editor piece of like when you finish your manuscript, how do you get it to that editor and find them?
Yeah, I do always do a developmental edit. And so basically what they do is they read through your book and tell you kind of the plot holes and that you're, where you could spend a little bit more time developing character. And I really like that part of the book because I think sometimes it's really hard for us to see that. But finding a reliable editor is very difficult. And I had a reliable editor for a long time and then struggled to find another one. But what I ended up doing is, for the first one, the way I found her was she actually had edited a self-published book that I really loved, and her information was on the copyright page. And a lot of times in your favorite self-published books, you will see the editor in that on that copyright page, and you can go find them via their website or their Instagram page, or they will have them linked on Amazon. So that's how I found my first editor. My second editor is actually a friend of mine who is very great. And she opened an editing business with her friend, and they're called Ad Astra, Editorial. And they're really fantastic. I think the things that you want to look for in an editor is how organized they are, and you can tell if they have a contract. If they have a contract or a very set way of doing things, a very set timeline, a lot of times what they'll also do is have you pay a certain amount of money up front, and then you pay the rest of the money when they finish the edit. Or they don't take any money at all until they finish the edit. Or they will edit the first chapter or first 10 pages of your manuscript, and you can read through that and figure out if you guys jive well, because there is such thing as, you might not get along with your editor. Just because they're an editor doesn't mean that they are the be all end all. It doesn't mean that what they say is something you're comfortable with. And I've had plenty of editors where I really disagree with the feedback they're giving me. It doesn't mean that they're wrong or I'm wrong. It just means that we're not on the same page about the state of this manuscript or the direction we want it to go. So I highly recommend, reaching out to any freelance editor and asking them what their procedures are, what their timeline is. Do they have a contract? Do they give you a sample of their work? It's just as important. Make all those inquiries, and don't be afraid to say, hey, I'm going with someone else, because it is expensive, and it should be expensive. But that is also, I think another element too is, do they do the developmental work? Do they do the line edits? Do they do proofreading? That sort of thing. I look for those things. Maybe you don't. It's up to you since you're self-published.
Right. Yeah, definitely. I think that's important that you mentioned the sample pages, because we had a question about someone who felt like they didn't get their money's worth from their editor. And I think that's a great thing you can ask for, is like, can you do a sample of the first 25 pages or something, just so you can get an idea, especially if you're going to be spending something like $1,000, which is what this person said they spent. And I know for a developmental edit, that's not very much necessarily, but depending on what type of edit you get, especially if you're going to be getting one that costs that much, you definitely want to get those sample pages.
Yeah, I highly recommend that. And I think that too, the genre I write in is we have different expectations, and you can tell just by those sample pages if that person sort of understands your audience. And that's very important too, because I've had editors who will take out, all of these scenes that I would keep because of my audience. So it's very interesting, and you just have to pay for what you need, and pay for a service that you feel is worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. I love your advice of looking in the front of the book, or somehow finding out what the editors are of your favorite books, because that's going to tell you a lot about what type of job they're doing. And that's great advice too when it comes to finding agents. If you're wanting to go the traditional route, that's another way to find those agents, is look at your favorite books and then find out who represented that author. But so Josh, just a follow-up question. Do you have an idea of the average price that people should be paying for an editor? And bearing in mind, it's going to be very different from what I've heard. Developmental edits are going to cost a lot more than if you're just doing proofreads and line edits.
Yeah, if you want information on that, there's something called the EFA, which is the Editorial Freelance Association, and they have all the standards for how much editors typically charge, and you'll be able to sort of weigh whether or not they're overcharging, or if they're average price, or if they're lower. There are a few freelance editors on Instagram too. One of the ones I had just heard about was, I think, Lavender Prose, and she does something where she charges 80 cents per page, which is actually very, very cheap. It's a very good price for editing. you would also need to look at what she's edited in the past to know if, you guys are going to jive, and she would have to take a look at the first few, bit of your pages. But she was just someone that has recently come into my awareness. And so yeah, I think just do your research, make sure a lot of reputable freelance editors will have people write testimonials too. So it's a hard thing. Editing's the hard part.
Yeah, that is a tough one. And I wonder, because we've talked about in our agent episodes, like one of the things is to contact their clients and ask questions about the agent. Is that something that you ever thought about, like contacting other people who've worked with this editor?
Well, since mostly the books that I was looking at, I knew those authors. So we had talked about, that. And so the editors that I had worked with people that I knew and loved. So yeah, you can definitely do that. It's a good way to establish a relationship with authors too, and that are kind of writing in the same genre as you, because I'm assuming that the books you're reading are probably the books kind of like the books you're writing. So
yeah, definitely. Okay, so the editing piece, that's kind of one of those steps after you have completed the manuscript, but there's so much to schedule, I think, and like trying to get everything, it's totally different than traditional publishing, because I know you often will have the cover done before you've even started the book, and that would just never happen in traditional publishing. And so like so many questions came in about what exactly are the steps that you take after you've completed that manuscript? Like what order, how long does it take from finishing the manuscript to publishing? So can you kind of walk us through that timeline a little bit?
This is going to differ for everyone because we're self-published, we sort of do what we want. But yeah, I mean, as far as when I finish a manuscript, I have my release day set. It's up for pre-order. We'll just go through Malice, sort of what I did with Malice. So Malice, I finished at the beginning of May, and I did have a few people read through it. I read through it myself. I read through my book on the Kindle app because it gives me the best interaction with the book as if it is an actual book, right? So I'm reading it as close to possible as how, my readers will read it. And I'll go through and I'll just like mark things to change, and then I change the whole document. And it goes into formatting at that point. And formatting can take a good week or so. There's a bunch of little nuances that come along with formatting, and I format for ebook, paperback, and hardback. Now, paperback and hardback, they're very similar. Ebook is the one that is a little bit different, but you have to format your paperback and your hardback first, and then put it into the ebook format. So it's just really interesting. There are things to think about, like, do you want chapter art? Do you want a table of content at the beginning of your ebook? Highly recommend because of navigation purposes, right? It's an easier interface. So those are all the things we kind of go through with formatting. And then it's time to sort of upload. And so you have a deadline. If you put your book up for pre-order like I do, you have a deadline of when you have to have it uploaded to Amazon. And they will keep reminding you about it. They'll freak you out because they'll email you a month beforehand telling you to upload it, and you'll think you missed your deadline. And if you miss your deadline, you can't do pre-orders for a whole year. And then we did something different this time where we uploaded the manuscript for pre-order in hardback, which was a whole other fiasco because it takes a really long time for the metadata to update elsewhere. And so that was very, very difficult. But once our formatting is done, you just kind of focus on marketing at that point because the book's about to be out. Marketing, the reason I release covers way before I finish a novel, even before I start a novel, is to sort of gain that traction and get people really excited for it. I do that now, and I sort of regret it because there's insanity that comes along with me releasing a cover. I'm inundated with a lot of questions and things that sort of get overwhelming, but you could finish your novel, then choose a cover, and then start the process of formatting. So you could do that as well. It's kind of up to you. But I do see what do you use for book formatting? My husband actually learned how to format books for me. Back in the day, I say back in the day, back in 2014, it was way harder to format books than it is now. Kindle has something called Kindle Create, which actually makes the process of creating an ebook pretty easy. We have given them feedback on how they could better automate the process, because one of the things that happens is when you import that PDF into Kindle Create, it doesn't always auto pick up on the table of content. It'll create a table of content for you based on the chapters. But it's a pretty automated process now. The thing it doesn't do well, that it thinks it does well, is you could also use Kindle Create technically to create your paperback, but it doesn't do well. So 10 out of 10 don't recommend. But there are a lot of sites out there, including KDP's platform, for training on how to format books. It's not as hard as you think. But if you don't write consistently in a document, for instance, Word, I don't. So we have this problem all the time. Your formatting is going to be really off. So all your indentions will be off, your periods will be weird, your commas will be weird. So we have to spend a lot of time fixing all that stuff, because I'm insane and I don't write in one platform. I don't write in one sort of word processor. But other than that, it's actually not that hard. And I highly recommend, you can pay someone for it, but you can really do it yourself. It's a long answer. It sounds scary. It's not.
No, have you used Vellum before? Oh.
Vellum, it's a part of it, but we don't use it. We used to use something called Calibre. I can't remember. But they moved from that to Kindle Create, and so that was really, really great. And I exclusively, I publish my ebooks exclusively on Amazon. I also use I enroll in their Kindle Unlimited program. It's harder for authors. Basically, I've never tried to go wide, which means that I'm available everywhere on all platforms, not just KDP and Kindle Unlimited for ebook. I may try that with another novel just to do research, but right now we're sort of gathering research on whether or not that's going to be a good direction for me. But starting out, Kindle Unlimited is kind of nice because you are put in the KU platform. They do pay you based on how many pages are read. So your book is sort of free to people who subscribe to Kindle Unlimited, but you're kind of paid on a scale based on how many pages are read. And then you also kind of get bonuses for that too. So it's a really neat program for newer authors. And a lot of authors, once they're established, they'll have their first book enrolled in Kindle Unlimited, and then their others are not enrolled in Kindle Unlimited. So there's all sorts of strategies you can try when you're using these platforms.
Right. And yeah, we did have a question about the benefits of KDP Select versus going wide, but you've only had experience so far with being in Select. So yeah, I mean, I think it's nice for increasing your visibility maybe when you're starting out, which is the hardest thing with self-publishing. And that kind of ties in. We actually had another question. They're kind of like going even farther back, and someone else was asking, well, did you always know that you wanted to self-publish, and what are the pros and cons of actually self-publishing versus choosing to go traditional or something, which is like a whole other question. But I think there's that question of like visibility versus having the freedom to do whatever you want, right? Like it might be easier to be visible if you're traditionally published because there's, you're kind of standing out in like a smaller market at that time when you're launching, but you don't have the freedom with self-publishing. So
I think you could always apply all the pros and cons to both sides, honestly, in the end, because I think just because you're traditionally published doesn't mean you'll have the visibility. And the same thing with self-publishing. I think it just depends on kind of what you're writing and how much, even if you do market a lot, are you going to hit that? Are you going to hit your audience, But for me, like I had not always wanted to self-publish. I kind of grew up in that age where we didn't have self-publishing so readily available initially. And then it was so frowned upon for a really long time. And and you felt like if you had to take that route or you chose to take that route, you did so because you couldn't get traditionally published. And that's probably true, because I can't even get traditionally published, but it's for reasons that you would not expect, right? It's because, the publishing houses don't publish what I write. But it doesn't mean that it's not what people want. So I think there are a lot of pros and cons to both, but specifically for self-publishing, we don't have a lot of resources, and we have a very limited number of platforms to work with. That's changing, but the hard part is that Amazon has a monopoly on it, right? And so if you use other platforms, you run the risk of not having that visibility. Amazon is algorithm based, so the better you do in their algorithm, the more visible you are, the higher your sales rank, the more opportunities you get via them to promote your book with some things called Kindle daily deals. When I first self-published in the very beginning in 2014, my book didn't do very well. Like, all the sales I put up for it were my own. Those don't get promoted really by Amazon. You have to promote them yourself. But when Amazon sends you requests for Kindle daily deals, they promote those themselves. So obviously you get more downloads. I get those requests a lot. I get a lot of requests now for their Prime reading program, which I don't recommend until they change sort of how they do it. But yeah, so one of the things that I recently had happen, which I can attribute this to not having enough resources, is when I went to put my hardback up for pre-order. It appeared on Barnes & Noble very quickly as a pre-order, but Amazon would not update their website for anyone. And I tried to call them and I tried to call Ingram, and they both blamed each other. And that is not the kind of customer service I am looking for when I am trying to solve a problem, because I run a business. So I was very frustrated, and I got on my platform, on my Instagram, and I complained about it. And it's something that we all struggle with them. Like, they're competitors, so they don't want to help each other, and they don't want to look out for us or the reader. So we do struggle with that. And I would say that's probably the most frustrating part of being a self-published author. Also, obviously, the things that we want, the Amazon platform doesn't invest in quick enough, I think. So hardback, for instance, or pre-orders for hardback and paperback, they're not investing in those things. They're unveiling things like Kindle Vella, which is like you can serialize stories. And I'm like, well, we really need these other things first. But so you're working with a corporation, a really massive corporation, and this is just one part of what they do, and they have the monopoly on it. So that's very challenging. I wouldn't say it shouldn't deter you from self-publishing, but it's just a reality that the bigger you get, for me especially, the more frustrating it is. Also, they have glitches in their algorithm, and they could cancel your pre-orders out of nowhere, which happened to a friend of mine. She had 700 pre-orders, and they all got canceled like a couple days before her release, which is absolutely devastating.
Yeah. Wow. Well, and really kind of dramatic, unexpected things like that can happen in traditional publishing too. But like you said, it's interesting. Like, you're more of this individual as a business against the huge corporation, which is a little bit the same as with traditional. But with traditional, you kind of have more, I guess, advocates that you're working with generally. Like, if you have an agent and an agency that has a legal team and like all of that kind of thing. So it changes that up a little bit. But I know we had a couple questions come in, but I do want to give Jenny a chance to chime in and just chime in with any questions you have too. But I'm going to hand it over to you for your burning question.
Do you have a burning question, Jenny?
This has really been fascinating because honestly, until I met Scarlett, I really knew nothing about how self-publishing works. I come from a background of traditional publishing. My mother was a traditionally published writer, and that's just the only world of publishing that I knew. So it's been really fascinating to get to know Scarlett and see how she's done all this, because it's really mind-blowing, kind of how much you have to manage in the different all over sort of different aspects of it, which I hadn't even thought about. So I guess my question was, and I think this is something maybe we hear a lot of sort of on the other side of things, is what is the biggest myth about self-publishing that you would like to dispel? Like, what is it, if you could tell people one thing that is not true, what would that be?
Oh, I think it's probably what I talked about earlier, which is like we self-publish because we can't get traditionally published, or because our books aren't good enough. It's just not the case. It took me a really long time to realize that getting an agent and being traditionally published, it has nothing to do with my books or my ability to be a good writer. It has it has everything to do with the fact that publishing is a business, and the things that they're going to invest in are the things that they feel are marketable and that they can put into very strict categories. And people who self-publish, we genre bend all the time. The things that we put together are just like a mishmash of stuff from all sorts of genres, but people want it. And so we have to kind of make a new home until we're sort of accepted into that environment. And it's not a bad thing. It's just, it is what it is. I mean,
Right.
And then even another myth I think that was perpetuated because self-publishers started publishing and having great success is that you can just self-publish and get an agent later or a publisher later. Well, I'm beyond that right now. Like, I can't get an agent and I can't get a publisher. Every time I talk to someone, it's, well, you make too much money. I mean, we're not going to be able to get you anything else. Well, you're already in Barnes and Noble stores. We can't really do anything else, So I'm at that point, right, where it feels like I still only have one option, right? Aside from my audiobooks, I am traditionally published with my audiobooks and with about 4 foreign publishers, but obviously that success came because my self-publishing did so well.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's a different world, and agents will tell you too that they're not really scooping up self-published authors like they used to do. They used to be, and so and a lot of traditional authors are trying to be hybrid. So it's a whole new world that's like ever changing, and I'm learning a lot about it as I go. But yeah.
Well, I know that you'd mentioned before that you'd always wanted to be a writer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Since you were a kid. Yeah. You started writing very young.
Mm-hmm.
But did you always want to be a marketer and a businesswoman and a contract lawyer and everything else?
I hate it.
So how did you come into all the rest of that?
It just kind of happens to you. You have to deal with it as it comes along. And it's like, thankfully, I made connections with you guys and I can send you all of my scary questions, right? Because things happen and I'm like, I don't know how to deal with this. I don't know what I'm doing. And I'm really bad at it. You can tell because I can't keep track of any of my, I can't keep track of any of my appointments. I can't do any of this, but I try and I learned a lot and I just keep applying stuff and it's working, but it is, it's kind of the insanity. It was the same insanity as it was being a librarian, kind of, because we have to be all things. We're not just people who check out books or recommend books or read all day. We suddenly became counselors and people's best friends, and so
Right.
it really is insanity. And I remember realizing when I suddenly had a business, and I just turned into I'm not an official S corp, but I'm an LLC that can submit taxes as an S corp.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a whole new world for me because I'm going to have to start paying myself a salary. And I'm like, they're like, you need to tell us your budget. Like, that's part of it. And I was like, still haven't done that. But that's something that I would have never thought about. Like, oh yeah, at some point when you start making too much money, right? You can't be just an LLC anymore or just a sole proprietor, right? You got to turn into an LLC. And I did that through a lawyer. So I had to hire a lawyer for that.
Like hiring lawyers, right? Well, I know, and it's like scary to think that I'm like the one giving you advice on foreign contracts.
You are.
We'll just move past that.
You are.
Oh my gosh. We've had so many great questions come in, so I want to get to all of these questions. And I definitely want to get to tab this question about marketing, but that's a pretty big one. And we had just been talking about Barnes & Noble. So before we get to that one, I want to do a swiftly tilting planets question. Talking about, do you see much demand for physical copies of books compared to ebooks? And I think your situation is very unique because you've had sales of like hardcovers and paperback too, right? In Barnes & Noble that have been pretty like different from what most self-published authors have experienced. So do you want to talk about the demand for those physical copies?
Yeah, I would say in the beginning when I was first getting started, I sold way more ebooks than I did paperback. And there was just a shift at some point where I started to sell more paperback books than hardback books or than ebooks. And then only a year ago did I release hardback. So I did not start with hardback. I only did that for my readers. So I kind of waited until there was a demand for hardback. And so now I sell, well, I looked at my numbers today and I sold 400 and I was at about 425 paperbacks today compared to 300 and some odd ebooks. And I don't know how many hardbacks I sold today because the numbers don't work like that through Ingram Spark. But I was just talking to a girl in my Facebook group and I know she was processing an order of 5,000 for just a touch of malice. And she said the orders for Ruin and Darkness were about they were very close to that as well. But I did not start doing the hardback until people started asking for it. And I initially planned to release Darkness only as an ebook. And the only reason I decided to do paperback so quickly after was because I kept getting questions about whether or not it was going to be in paperback. But it did take a long time for paperback to it was really weird. It was a tipping point, definitely, when the paperback sales increased. And so now pretty much every day I sell more paperbacks than I sell ebooks. So
that's so wild. I mean, do you think it was just the popularity of the ebook that has driven like all of these orders from Barnes & Noble and like other major retailers and the popularity of the paperback just in general, or like what do you think is a shift overall?
I think I got viral on TikTok. And from what I can tell, I guess that's what happened. I'm not really sure. But you start to find that it certainly, I think it depends on what you write, but I think what I really have here is a fandom. And in the book community, when you have a fandom, they want everything that you make. And so there are people who have 5 different versions of my books just because they love it. And you will find that they also just desperately want to support you. So I don't know. I can't really pinpoint any one thing. I can just tell you, like, I would start checking my KDP account and that's just one avenue of my income. But and I would see these shifts, and I don't know what spurred the paperback, but I believe that the demand for the hardback especially comes from TikTok.
Well, I mean, that is interesting because like you said, I think once you develop that fan base or like your 1,000 true fans or your multiple thousands of true fans, they're going to want those different formats. And the hardbacks have always been like a sort of collector's thing that you want to have on the shelf to show it off. And so, I think once you reached a certain level of popularity, that's what you want to be able to show off on social media or whatever it is, to be like, I'm a part of this fan base that's going on. But that's an interesting question. I'm sure the thing that people are going to want to know is like, how did you develop that sort of fan base? And that ties into Tabitha's question. What is a typical marketing strategy that you would use to promote your novel? And I think that's the important add-on. How is it different now from when you started? From before your first book, when you're trying to do it for your very first book in the series, as opposed to now, like the third one in that series. So,
I think this is a hard question to really answer because the reason it's different now is because I have readers, and my readers are really my marketers. Even my street team is a team of people that submit applications basically telling me how much they love my book. They're in the comments right now. And they promote my book for me. They're like wild fans. My street team is wild. I love them. And they create hype. And so I wouldn't have had them without just gaining a readership, right? But in the beginning, when I released A Touch of Darkness, I had spent time creating very simplistic quote graphics for Pinterest and but mainly for Pinterest, because I noticed that people liked to repin very simplistic quotes. And I felt like there was a space on there for my specific retelling, which is a Hades and Persephone retelling, modern retelling. And I also knew that sort of thing was very popular on Tumblr. So, but I also knew from experience, just like testing, that a graphic doesn't do very well on Tumblr, just the words do. And so I would go to both of those websites and I would just post, maybe 2 or 3 times a week, graphics and things. And I created my own board on Pinterest for my quotes. And it's just simply called Hades and Persephone because I wanted people to be able to search it. And if you put it under like the title, no one's going to know what that is, but they'll know what Hades and Persephone what it is. And that board had way more followers than my actual account, my actual Pinterest account. It was really funny because for a long time, I thought my Tumblr account, my Pinterest account were going to surpass my Instagram account in followers. That's not the case anymore. But so really a lot of my marketing came from that and being very, very, very interactive on my Instagram account. And I think what I did well was choose about 3 places where I was going to constantly post, and everything else is kind of secondary. And now I have 1 place where I post Instagram, and everything else is secondary. And why I am known as the author on Instagram who is highly interactive with her readers. And I think that people really connect to me in a different way. And I think that I think they feel like I'm very genuine, and I'm very glad for that because I try really hard to be very genuine and very open about my experiences publishing and my life in general. And I chose to be that way when I began this account because I wanted to change people's lives and help in different ways. But you get to choose what you want to do with your social media. So I would just say have a very specific intention, choose your aesthetic. Who are you as an author? What's your author brand? I'm like kind of gothy, kind of like, I don't know. I like dark things. I have tattoos, right? It's just like a whole thing. And everything I post, even my author pictures are very centered around that aesthetic. All my Pinterest boards are centered around one aesthetic. Everything I retweet on Tumblr is centered around one aesthetic. It's my aesthetic. It's what I love. But it has an audience. It attracts people, right? And then just pick how you're going to choose to market your book. And I literally only market my book in one way, and that is through quotes. I feel like that's the only way I market my book. And it works for me. It really does. It is what it is. And now after all this time, I have readers who will also market my book. So that's how it's changed. That's how it's different.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I have a question, kind of like a nitty-gritty question about Pinterest. So before your first book came out and you're posting these quotes, what were you linking to? Like your website, or like where were you leading them to with those?
I don't remember where I was linking initially. I think my Instagram page maybe.
Okay. Yeah.
But after I went in and changed every single link to my author landing page on Amazon.
Okay, on Amazon. Okay,
yeah.
Interesting. And then here's my other question, because being me, and I'm always like worried about these things. Like when you're creating a board that's an aesthetic, that's not pins that you made, but you're like gathering these, Hades and Persephone themed pins or whatever. Are you concerned about like what they link to? Like, do you investigate like where they go? Because when I have a weird feeling when I'm gathering pins, like I don't want to pin stuff that I don't know where it goes to. You know what I mean?
Well, I don't really think about that much because I also feel like people are just collect images on Pinterest. Even my click-throughs aren't super high. I mean, they are on some pins and some they're not. So I don't really feel like people actually click through very often. But in the beginning, when I first started writing, people would say they found me on Pinterest. That's how big of a deal that the Pinterest was for me, is that people would find me there. And now people say, I found you on Book Talk.
Yeah, that's so funny. I love it. But again, like, you should probably remind, because some people may not know, like, it wasn't you on TikTok. It was like your fans on TikTok that made you go viral on there.
I didn't have a TikTok. I got a TikTok because of them. I thought, oh, I got to do that now.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, so I think that's an interesting part of it too. But so we talked about, like, you've been expanding your offerings ever since you've been selling more. So from ebooks and paperbacks to hardbacks, and then the audiobooks. So we had a question, can you talk about audiobooks as a self-published author? Do you need to option? So I think they're asking, like, do you need to wait for a traditional publisher to pick you up, or do you think it'd be worth it to produce them yourself? But you've had that traditional path with all of your audiobooks, right?
Yeah, and I would highly recommend I just would recommend not doing an audiobook without the audience, because it's expensive to produce on your own. There are ways to do it. I think it's called ACX through a traditional or through self-publishing. I don't know much about it.
The new one,
Yeah, I don't know much about it, but it is expensive to produce your own audiobook. And I was very lucky that Tantor reached out to me and wanted to produce them. And I highly recommend that because first of all, it's like they're not going to reach out to you unless there's a demand, and at that point, I can make money from this kind of thing. But other than that, I mean, otherwise you don't know if you're going to make money from it. So I just kind of wait until my readers sort of tell me what they want. At this point, it's very difficult because people don't realize I'm self-published. So the things they ask for, I'm like, that's kind of impossible. Or I don't have those kind of resources, or, but so you can do self-published audiobooks, just expensive. And if you're not making income off your actual books that are up, don't do it.
Yeah. And I think that's a good piece of advice too, is you want to make sure that you are at least earning back everything that you're investing into this, if at all possible. But so kind of a follow-up on this, and actually we could loop Ginny in too, because we haven't asked about your audiobook situation. But as a self-published, or maybe as a traditionally published author, because you're both actually, you're
done this
on audio, and I've done this. Yeah. Do you get to choose your own voice actors?
Kinda.
Well, and yes, I mean, I think we have the same experience, because for my traditional, I've had a couple, and well, actually, it's been kind of different depending on the publisher, because often they'll send like 4 or 5, or maybe a few more samples of an actor reading a couple minutes or something, and then you will get to kind of choose one of the samples, has been my experience. But did they do that with yours too, Scarlett?
They did. So I actually didn't get as many options. I got 2 for Persephone. I got one for Hades. Yeah, and
that's so funny.
It was interesting. I actually struggle so hard because they read your book, and I can't. Oh God, I can't listen to it. I cannot do it. It took me like an hour to get through this like short sample. But Meg is a fantastic Persephone. She was such a perfect choice. The thing I find with audio is that even though they ask you for your feedback, they don't really care. And so you can give them a pronunciation guide, and they will be like they'll throw that out completely. Because they asked me like how to pronounce Luce's name, and I said Luce. And they were like, oh yeah, we thought that is how it was pronounced, but it's not pronounced like that in the actual book. So whatever. But
oh, that's so funny. Yeah, I've never listened to my audiobooks, and actually the different situation for me was I have a couple with this great Australian publisher, Belinda. And I think they basically just sent me the person and were like, listen to this person, do you approve? And I was like, yeah, they're great. Like that was kind of, or one of them, it was really funny because I had a Southern, it was supposed to be like an American, like Southern accent, right? And so they sent me all these samples of someone doing this amazing Southern Canadian, I guess, accent, which is totally different. But it's because they're in Australia. So they're just thinking North America, I guess. And I was like, actually, no. So I had to give them an example. And I think I referred them to like the movie Friday Night Lights or something where everybody from Texas. Like, anyway, so it was pretty interesting. And yeah, so working sometimes with like foreign audiobook publishers trying to get the voices right is very interesting. But yeah, Jenny, we haven't heard. Do you have an audiobook that's under production? Or
I know that there is an audiobook. It's part of the contract. I know that according to Amazon, it's available August 31st. Now you know as much as I know.
Wow. Well, it'll be interesting to see because that's really coming up. If they're
yeah,
give
we'll
you a
see.
chance.
Like I'm not entirely convinced that that's. But
I'll hear about it soon.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah, that'll be a surprise then.
Yeah, I mean, they should be getting that under production soon.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about this has been it's been such a crunch timeline because it's less than 10 months from auction to release. So like everything is like super smushed. So I'm sure that I know it's happening. I just don't have any details.
There is this guy on TikTok who reads my books in this like super sexy, like, I don't know. I cannot listen to it though. Like my readers love it. I know Lisa's in the comments and I know she sent him a quote to read and I die every time. I can't listen to it. It's just cringe for me to listen to anything that read by someone else. I die. Like they were so sweet and sent me a birthday video and I died. Like I couldn't do it.
That's so sweet. It is so sweet. But yeah, it's just for me, I don't want to listen because I just know that I'm going to hear something that I would change now. And I just don't want to subject myself to that. I'm just going to want to edit myself basically. But okay, well, we are still taking questions in the chat if anybody has them. But I have more compiled questions from earlier that people had sent in. And there were quite a few of them. But let's kind of continuing on with the marketing, you did not mention ads or any promotions like BookBub or things that people are probably familiar with. So have any kind of ads been a part of your marketing strategy?
I used to do Facebook ads. I don't do Facebook ads anymore. The thing I recommend with Facebook ads is to shut them down quickly if they aren't working. So if you're not getting any kind of views or click-throughs, don't waste your money on it. Pinterest is very particular about their ads. They have to look a certain way. They actually changed those guidelines since I was just uploading and promoting a few quotes, just like my very favorite ones or ones I noticed got a lot of attention, but they won't let me do that anymore because they changed the ad guidelines. And then you can, I have an ongoing ad on Amazon that I'm not actually sure does anything. I just keep it going. I invest a little bit more in that. I think I spend about $400 there, just ongoing for whatever it does. Don't be like me. Don't waste $400 potentially without knowing what it's doing. So yeah, I mean, BookBub is a big one you'll hear about. It's very hard to get into their email list. Their ads they sucked for me. So I have had no success.
Even like their pay-per-click ones.
Yeah. I've never had any luck with those. So I say I tried it just once, and I was like, no, this is not for me. But getting onto their email list is a whole other thing, and I think they really want free books. I have like 4,500 reviews on A Touch of Darkness, and they won't touch it, even when it's like a 99-cent deal. So they're just like, no. But I don't need them. I don't need it anymore. Right. But I would just try it, see what you can do. There are all sorts of YouTube videos about ads that talk about analytics that are way above my head. So if you're really invested in that kind of thing, do it. But I'm really big on word of mouth marketing. That's what has worked for me. And so I just think you have to do what makes you most comfortable. And I can be like an engaging extrovert when I want to be, and I do it.
You do it. Yeah. And I think, like we mentioned before, your first book is probably going to be real different from your follow-up books, and spending that kind of money on a first book with nothing to lead, like it's not leading into anything, I think would be a even bigger question. Like, do you want to invest that money, and are you going to see any return on investment when it comes to ads? But yeah, it never hurts to play around with that stuff though, if you have a little bit to invest and to see if it takes off. The only time I've ever done Facebook ads is when they offer you the free, like, we're giving you a $10 credit, boost this post. I'm like, okay, we'll see what happens.
Okay.
nothing happens. But, that's so funny. So yes, let me look through my little, and also Jenny, pop in at any moment with your
I have no more questions because I know nothing, and this is all like fascinating information to me. So
you're so funny. Well, some people were asking about like traditional deals. Would you ever consider a traditional deal for your main, for ebook and print? And you kind of talked a little bit about that, but do you want to add on to that?
I think it would be really hard. It would be really hard because the money would have to be there. I make a lot of money from. It just is the reality.
Maybe one day we can all say that. That will be our.
I know. I would love it. But at this point, just doing the math, like, if you make $250,000 in 3 months there's no publisher that is going to be like, here's $250,000. Like, they're not going to do that. So that would be very difficult for me. It would have to be a really, really good deal. But I will continue to do, the foreign deals. I'll continue to, I have some big ones and some small ones, and I've already contracted all my books, even the ones that aren't written, with Tantor. So I told them, I was like, hey, I'm writing a vampire trilogy. Do you want it? They're like, yes. So I'll do those routes. The things that are difficult or cost a lot of money to produce. So translating a book is really expensive.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and speaking of money, a couple of people had asked how long it took before you started making money on A Touch of Darkness, the first book.
It depends on what you're asking. Like, how long did it take me to make a livable wage, or just like fun money? Like, I can tell you. So the first year A Touch of Darkness was published, I made $2,000 from it, and I was so excited. I was like, oh my God, $2,000. And that comes from not making any money on my previous books, right? So I was like, oh, I was so excited. I was like, I can file taxes on this. So stupid. And then
I would be excited too. Yeah, you're selling copies.
The next year, I started to. I kind of started off. It was weird. In January, I was like, I made $800 in a month, I think, or something, and I was like, yeah, it was really cool. An extra $800, and then slowly it was just like $8,000, and I was like, oh God, like $8,000. And then I was reaching $10,000, and I was like, that's when I thought, I think you could be a full-time author, and it never went down from there. Yeah. So, and now I'm a 6-figure author. So, yay.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but like you said, it took a while because that wasn't your first book either, like the first book in the series, and it still took a while to get going. So I think that's a good story for people to hear too. It takes a while to build that momentum, even on something that has ended up being wildly successful. So you really had to stick with it, and you were constantly getting it out there, like with your Instagram and all the things that you were doing. So So yeah, that's a good.
Yeah, and I had one other book. My sequel was published within that time, and then when I quit working, I was a librarian, full-time librarian. I was releasing A Game of Fate, which is my third book. And, but my primary, my money, I call it my money maker, is A Touch of Darkness. But we have had a huge increase in the number of copies of A Touch of Ruin that have been selling. And right now we have about a 30% growth every month. So my sales increase by 30% every month.
Awesome.
Math.
Amazing math and business. I love that though. And I think that it is so important for all authors, even if they're traditionally published, to really think about that business side and to consider themselves as entrepreneurs as well as artists.
Yeah.
So
unintended business men and women.
Yes.
And everything in between.
Yes.
People.
So it's so true. Well, we had another question. Well, kind of two that tie together, which is, how do you stay motivated? I mean, you're self-employed and it's kind of, you are the person who is creating everything and running this business. And how do you stay motivated? And what do you do if you confront writer's block?
Well, my readers really keep me motivated. And I think they definitely are the people who keep me going on this path, because when I was writing prior in like 2014, I lost momentum. I lost my desire to work on a story because it was just me, you know? So definitely like readers keep you super invested and they help me fangirl. And anytime I am struggling with just like motivation, I go on my Instagram and I ask them to tell me, like, give me motivation, tell me what you love. And they always do. They're always there for me. Writer's block is a whole thing. I always have writer's block when I'm trying too hard. And I have to step back and like take a break. And I hate taking breaks because I feel so much pressure from my dear readers to keep going. But anytime I take a break, I can come back and do it well. Or when I'm trying too hard, I try to make things too complicated. And so there are a couple people like Ashley, one of my friends, I reach out to her and I'm like, hey, what am I doing? And I'll just like tell her what I'm doing. And then I realize what I'm doing. And then I'm like, okay, I'm good. And then I'll go back to writing. I have to get things out of my head. That's my biggest struggle, is if I get it out of my head, I can move on. So I would just say, don't take it too seriously. Just remember why you're writing. It's supposed to be fun.
Yeah, that's a tough one to remember sometimes, especially when you are in business and you're doing it full time. You're like, but it's fun. Yeah, it is. It is though. Okay, awesome. Well, we did have one more question that we got ahead of time, which was that if there was one thing in self-publishing that you would do differently if you like could start over, what would that be? Tough one, huh?
Yeah, gosh, what have I done that I was like, oh God.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if I would do this differently because I have mixed feelings about it, but I always want to finish a book earlier than my pub date. And I know this sounds insane to y'all because you finished your books like 2 years ago, and but I usually write up until the deadline, and I always have this grand idea that I will be finished with the book a month beforehand, and I never am. But then when it's done, I want it to be out there. Like I want Malice to be out there because then that's the official. It's done. So I have mixed feelings about that, but I think the nature of self-publishing is what it is. And it does prevent certain things, like the way that I write, you know, it prevents the audiobook from coming out with the rest of the books. It's delayed by 2 months. It's whatever. You know, it's the Bookish Box also has contracted all my books to make special editions, and they're going to be released in pairs, and I haven't written Retribution yet. Like they want it released at the end of the month, at the end of the year, and I'm like, well, it's not written yet. And so Italy wants Chaos. They want the final book and I think another publisher is also like that, and they won't include them in their marketing or like some of their contracts until they're written. So it's kind of weird. So you set yourself up that way, but it just is what it is. It doesn't really stress me out. I don't know. It's how I do it, and it's how I will continue to do it. And so
I love it. Well, I think we answered pretty much all of the questions that we had coming in ahead of time. So this was super amazing. We learned all about your self-publishing process, and yeah, it's just really inspiring to hear the story of how you took off after having, you know, a couple that maybe didn't take off the way that you had hoped, but you kept going with it and you've seen such huge success. So that's a great story to hear.
It's a great story.
It's a great story.
I think
I like it.
There are a lot of things that people just assume about you, which one of those is that I just like had overnight success. And I think the more successful you are, the more people will think you were an overnight success. And this definitely was not that. This was definitely years of trial and error, and just like for me deciding what worked for me and what didn't. So just keep doing it. If it's what you really want to do, you'll keep doing it.
Yep, absolutely. So is that your final piece of advice that you want to leave with people out there?
Yeah.
Keep at it.
I think that's a good place to end.
It is. I think that's great. And thanks to everyone who joined us out there and provided us with amazing questions. If anyone has an idea for a topic that they would like to see on a future episode, let us know in the comments. And we are on Twitter now at Writers Need Help. So head over there and follow us to hear about our upcoming episodes. And thanks so much to everyone for joining us. And thanks, Jenny, for joining us too, even though I didn't let you like get in. You didn't hop in with.
I'm learning. I'm listening. It's good. This was like super fascinating.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone, and have a great evening. Let's have our little theme song to play us out.